Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Do Sasquatch and other cryptids live almost within sight of large cities like Boston? Do phenomena like black helicopters, ordinarily associated with UFOs, turn up when the big guy is around? Has the Bridgewater Triangle grown to include Cape Cod and part of Rhode Island?
Hello, and welcome to the 960th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, and on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those mostly local questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and dad, Paul. And if you'd like to communicate with us today, the number is 401-766-1240. That is from anywhere. Or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
John Horrigan is an Emmy Award-winning television host, sports announcer, folklorist, historical researcher, and reenactor, and a widely traveled investigator of the unexplained. John has produced and hosted countless cable television and radio programs dedicated to unexplained mysteries over the years. His paranormal investigations have taken him to British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, and Ohio, pursuing the elusive Sasquatch. He produced the popular DVD Mysterious Bridgewater Triangle, a long-recognized flap area at the eastern edge of our AM/FM listening area. John lives in eastern Massachusetts, which makes him pretty local compared with a lot of our other guests. And
so, John Horrigan, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you with us, and it's always fun having someone in studio because
it's a rare treat.
Well, it's been increasingly less rare, but that's hey, I'll take it. It's a lot of fun. It's more fun to speak face to face, in my opinion. So let's just hop right into it, I guess. So where is the Bridgewater Triangle, and what is it all about?
Okay, well the term first comes from Lauren Coleman's seminal book, Mysterious America. Essentially, it's a 200-square-mile triangle with its apex in Abington, Massachusetts, its southeastern corner in the Freetown State Forest, which I don't like, we can chat about that, and then the southwestern corner is on the Rehoboth, Massachusetts-Rhode Island state line. And within that area is what they call the Beating Heart, the Hockomock Swamp, 6,000 acres of thick briar, quick mud I call it, I don't call it quicksand, various insects and creatures, and it's almost impenetrable. And I don't recommend people to go in there alone or without GPS. It can be dangerous in terms of the wildlife there and the diseases that emerge from the insects there.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Ticks.
Well, we have a big tick problem here in New England, so it's pretty bad. And we were actually just in Rehoboth yesterday, ironically. But we're pretty familiar with the Freetown State Forest. We've been there a couple of times, my dad more so than I, and we've had some very, very interesting experiences there. So what are some of the highlights of those experiences there?
Well, there's different anomalous creatures, as Dad pointed out, black helicopters, which are normally associated with UFO sightings, UFOs, balls of light, for instance, near the Taunton Random Dog Track along the railroads, ghosts, and then, of course, you have man-beast anthropoids, a.k.a. Bigfoot, thunderbirds, enormous birds seen there, phantom pumas or cougars seen there, giant black dogs, large snakes, and of course, it's people say it's a cursed area because that was the site of Native American graveyards and some conflicts within King Philip's War, which took place between 1675 and 1676. So there's a smorgasbord of paranormal phenomena has occurred there, or allegedly occurred there, over the last hundreds of years.
Well, the triangle thing is something we interpret as a research tool. You know, it's not that things are limited necessarily to that, but you have to start somewhere. So with the Bridgewater Triangle, this will be of extreme interest to our local audience here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and beyond. I've heard that, maybe unofficially at least, that the triangle has increased in size, and it has now moved eastward to include much of Cape Cod, and moved westward to just about here in northeastern Rhode Island. Is that true?
The Bridgewater trapezoid is what you're
Bridgewater, yeah.
But for instance, Dover Demon, which took place in 1977, where some school kids on April vacation allegedly saw some spindly, beige-colored, alien-type entity clinging to a tree, clinging to a rock wall. That sits out your outside the triangle, but it's okay. I mean, to say that there are paranormal areas, and we can come up with some sort of shape to define it.
Yeah, the sort of Bridgewater dodecahedron.
There we go.
The Bridgewater rhombus, if you will.
As John Keel said, the journalist, the entire planet is haunted. But again, we have, for example, our Connecticut Triangle, Litchfield Triangle, is now about 330 square miles. The Pennsylvania Triangle, which we only been working on since 2016, has expanded out to about 100 square miles now, and we have a new page in the book, so to speak, that is pushing us up north with that one. But again, how do you know where a triangle ends or where it begins and what's associated with what? But everything pretty much is haunted, as John Keel said, whatever that may mean. So have you had personal experiences in the triangle? I know we had a personal experience of meeting each other while we were doing a production with our good friend Alexander Petikoff. But
we appeared in a documentary, Beyond the Trail.
Well, you were in a tie out in the middle of nowhere, so I think that had to be the giveaway. I figured you had to be John Horgan.
Well, first of all, I don't like the Freetown State Forest. That was the second time there. It's creepy. I just felt you should not be here. There's a long road which Alex, who I consider the preeminent Bigfoot researcher right now on the planet.
I do too.
Let alone filmmaker. He's an extraordinary filmmaker.
He is.
So gifted, so talented. It's all about second place after Alexander when you talk about it. But he did a piece on Copacut Road in that documentary. And one of the legends in the Bridgewater Triangle is the Phantom Trucker of Copacut Road. And I think I figured that out. That allegedly, if you're driving on that road and you don't break your suspension because there's some potholes or whatever, a truck will pull up behind you and honk its horn, flash its lights, etc. And I figured out what that was. That's an Amazon truck late on its delivery.
Well, it could have been me. I would drive the same kind of truck. Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, people ask me, what does a writer need a pickup truck for? I said, well, when you're bombing around in places like Pennsylvania Fields and the Bridgewater Triangle, you have to have four-wheel drive. Never mind the winters around here in the hills.
Yeah, that's true.
So, it comes in handy there. But there were Pukwudgies also reported. Can you talk about them? Because we had an interesting experience with.
Okay. Pukwudgies came to the public's attention in the early part of the century via author Christopher Balzano, who's one of the preeminent researchers, along with Chris Pittman of the Bridgewater Triangle. Yeah, and I call him the godfather, Chris Pittman of the Bridgewater Triangle, of the Hockomock Swamp. But essentially, there are different descriptions. There's mini Native Americans with an angry attitude, and they show up, and they're almost dwarf-like. And I guess in that film that I narrated for Aaron Cadju in 2013, there was a guy by the name of Bill who had allegedly seen one in the half-light of a street light. And they're seen, I guess, near, a Sonnet Ledge. But I'll be honest with you, I don't go there, and it's not part of my research. It doesn't interest me.
Yeah.
Nor does ghost research does not interest me as well. So they're odd creatures, and somehow I associate if they're being seen with Native American curses again from 350 years ago.
So technically, that whole area, well, at least Freetown, from what I understand, now I might be wrong, is a reservation, correct? So and nobody lives there, is it?
Right. Right. So if you want to be undisturbed, if you're a paranormal entity, that's the place to hide, right? And you've got thousands of years of inhabitation by Native Americans, something beyond our comprehension as descendants of European settlers, correct? We're appropriators is what we did. We took this land, and we brought our diseases and our animals and our plants and wiped out entire populations. And I think that we have to respect the Native American tradition here. I want to say I believe in curses, and some people are cursed for the dark cloud over their head, and that you can, if you work with a Ouija board too, you can bring curses upon you. So tell me about your Pukwudgie story. I'm interested in hearing that.
Oh, okay. Well, it was 2010, and we were at our four-wheel drive out there, and we were, exploring some roads we hadn't been on before in the Freetown State Forest. And we got to a little spot at the head of the Copacut Reservoir, all right? And it was a beautiful little spot. There's a story about that, too. But we got out, and you can see the lake is all the way down. It's beautiful. So we felt as though we were being watched. And we just took a few random shots in around. And when we looked at them, and I have a caveat here, we don't claim there's anything in any photos. People can judge for themselves. But I did do intelligence photography in the military. And I have a nodding acquaintance with what you're going to see and what you're not going to see. Now, in the woods, particularly on a sunny day in the summer, you're going to have the interplay of light and all this. You're not going to have flesh tones unless it's some kind of fungus, which this was not. And there seemed to be a full figure in a fur coat with a very plain face. And there seemed to be another face with a monk-like cowl over it, very small. And if people want to see these, they can go to newenglandghosts.com, and a site that is in dire need of redesign and reconstruction. But nevertheless, there is a case page, and his Bridgewater Triangl, click that, and you can see these pictures. They're around the internet, too. So what that was, I don't know. Now, wouldn't you know that 5 years later, a man came to me and said he had been on that road, maybe 100, 200 feet from where we were?
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a little marsh. And he said he was with his dog, whose name was Bingo, and a little figure was standing by the side of the road, beckoning him to come in to the woods. And the guy figured he'd gone bye-bye, but the dog saw it too, and was very nice. So the guy, he figured retreat was the better part of valor. Off he went, never went back there again. So those were our Pukwudgie stories firsthand, so to speak.
That's a similar story to the one that was in Aaron Cadgey's documentary. Again, the guy's name, I should know it, Bill, who, with his dog, encountered something, just as I mentioned, just on the termination of a street light to the shadow, and the thing was beckoning him, say something to the, come, we want you, come here, something like that. And he said, I'm not going with you.
Well, I talked about that in the production you and I were both in.
Yeah.
And it sounded like it was trying to speak English.
Correct.
But in my opinion, not having been there, I would suggest that maybe was a young juvenile Bigfoot, not a Pukwudgie.
Could be. And again, it's perception.
I
believe people are receptors. I believe you're a receptor, but because of your interest in it, you weren't didn't get into this randomly. You were called. Right?
Yeah.
They come to you. You don't go to them. And I think there are people that are receptors.
Yeah.
When I was in Gulf Breeze, Florida, in 1997, investigating the Ed Walters photographs, people were seeing UFOs, and I was standing near them, and I couldn't see them because of the angle of light or what have you. And I was told, you're not at the right vibrational rate, or something like that.
There might be something to that. I mean, I think people...
But that's so unkind.
It is. Well, you put political correctness onto the paranormal. Heaven help us.
It's a very esoteric way of saying you don't got what you need.
You ain't one of us.
Well, I'll give you an example of my own Bigfoot experience in Pennsylvania, 2016, September 16th. I told you about it before we went on the air today, and people have heard about it. But I see it right there. To me, it was a sacred experience, because I always will go into any kind of wilderness area with a respect and with a sense of love, and very positive. Unarmed, yep. And except with cameras. And then all of a sudden, a short time later, we weren't around, but it was broad daylight. Little girl coming down the road beneath the hill where this occurred ran into a creature of very similar description, broad daylight, absolutely terrified. She would come to our neighborhood meetings in that area when we would be down there investigating and cry. Now, I hope at some point when she gets older she'll tell us about this. But her parents would bring her so she would feel more reassured that other people were seeing this sort of thing. So we've yet to hear the full story of her experience, except from her parents. So I think you do bring a certain something with you.
Absolutely. And while we're riffing on Bigfoot, can I tell you my favorite story?
Please.
So I Don Keating from Eastern Ohio, who's been investigating Bigfoot since 1979.
Okay.
All right, and he's just concluding his career now. A dear friend of mine. I went out in the 90s with him into Eastern Ohio. And we traveled out to see John Green, one of the four horsemen of Bigfoot research. I was lucky enough to meet John Green, Rene Dehinian, Grover Krantz, and Peter Byrne. We were staying at John Green's house. And again, this is just the internet's getting going. I'm thumbing through his index cards for Bigfoot stories. And in pops this burly, bald-headed guy, strong as an ox, a steel worker from Hamilton, Ontario. His name's Mike McDonald. Do we have time? Okay. So
yeah.
He had been out in Harrison Hot Springs, where John Green lives. He had been at Harrison Lake and on this island reconnoitering Bigfoot or a family of Bigfoots. So he said he's down to half a sleeve of saltines. He's got to come back in from the bush. And he's up on this hill pitched, and he's been tracking Bigfoot, finding scat piles, the alt sulfur smell being watched. Final night, he's lying down, and literally he says he's shaking on the ground because whatever, his thunderous steps are coming around. And it was full moon, and something came around and eclipsed the moonlight, on his tent. He reaches into his backpack. He's tracking Bigfoot. He thinks it's a grizzly. Gets his bear spray. 1,000, 2,000, 3. Unzips it, sprays it, maces himself. Had the nozzle the wrong way. And then he said just a blur. He saw this creature ran away. He fell down with the sleeping bag at his ankles in his underwear. There's a sailboat docked there. Man comes out with a gun. There's a Bigfoot. Calm down, son. You can sleep on the dock. Here's whiskey. Have two whiskeys. He's lying. I'll go get your sleeping bag. You're sleeping here on the dock. He's sleeping on the dock. Can't get to sleep. His mind's racing. All of a sudden, he hears footfall on the coast, on the bank of the lake, and something enters the water. And now he loses it. He pees himself. And he said he didn't believe in God. And he started praying there, and he could hear bubbles, and then something underneath the dock where he's lying scratches under his head. And he just lost it. He's praying, please, please, please. Then the bubbles went away, and he heard this thing, and he could smell it, musty. Get out of the water and walk away. So that's and he told me this at 2 a.m. in Don Keating and Chuck Story and Mark DeWorth in John Green's living room. And that always stuck with me. Mike McDonald was the guy's name. And we took him to Vancouver, where there was a Sasquatch symposium. And
Sasquatch symposium.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's right.
Love it.
So that's one. And then, of course, if we have time, we can now talk about the Bigfoot stories in Bridgewater Triangle. If you're
we got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess the story begins December of 1969. I went to Bridgewater State College, and back then it was a teacher's college, right? And apparently some young ladies, some co-eds in a dorm saw this bipedal entity silhouetted in the background. They thought it was a prowler, a perv, right? And no, they said it's a gorilla. So people were freaking out, saying, wow, what is this? And we could speculate as to why it was there at that time. But suddenly people in Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, East Bridgewater begin to find footprints, begin to find broken gates, a chicken pulled out of a hen house. They had to have an opposable thumb, right, to unlatch that. So it gets to be spring of 1970 now, and people are freaking out. Bridgewater police have had enough of this. They put out patrol stakeouts. A woman had reported finding footprints. Officer sitting in his cruiser, and essentially something picks up the back of his cruiser, and he puts his foot on the brake, and his red lights highlight a furry torso. Turns his spotlight on like Adam 12 and sees this, what he called a bipedal bear, Yogi, running around the side of the house, right? And it goes up until 1970 and 71, and for all intent and purpose, that flap, as you mentioned before, ends over an 18-month period. And then it picks up again in the mid to late 90s, where people are reporting them. And I guess the big case is John Baker, and I got to kayak the Town River and the Hockomock River. They confuse that sometimes. He's laying trap lines at night in the winter, trying to catch muskrat. Yum.
I mean, why not, huh?
Yeah, and he hears the footfall because, in frozen puddles, he hears, has a sense of being watched, sulfurous smell, sees, again, some sort of ape-like creature just watching him walking alongside. And that's basically where the story ends. So I believe that where these things are seen, there's a tradition of them, not over 10 years, 20 years, but over hundreds of years, that just like people settle in the same area, perhaps these, whatever they are, I don't know if they're flesh and blood. At this point in time, I still don't know, that they tend to exist in the same area.
That is an interesting point, and that kind of I've been kind of making notes as we've been talking. And there's all these archetypes in all of these sort of places, right? Bigfoot being one of them, you know. Bigfoot, UFOs, you know, we can toss ghosts in there if you want to, you know, but there's always some sort of archetypal thing, right? We're not, most of it is like stuff we've experienced at some point in time. And a lot of it, except for maybe Bigfoot and a handful of other things, tends to, you know, the way we interpret it tends to descend from, you know, European folklore in some way, shape, or form. Black dogs, great example, right? You know, you hear stories of those over in England, France, you know, all over Western Europe. Yeah. Right, and, you know, even canine cryptids, which is kind of making a comeback, right? You know, there's a really fun sort of fact that, you know, the idea of you know, werewolves and vampires is stuff very alive in Eastern Europe. That tradition has never gone away. That is still very much a thing. And it's even technically a thing in the Middle East, Greece, all those places. It's never changed. In Western Europe, it kind of died out, but then it got brought over here, and then it kind of died out, sort of. But now it's kind of making a comeback, which is very interesting. But again, back to the archetypal sort of things. Now, you made a really interesting point that because Americans appropriated the land, right, you know, we appropriated all of these things, do we appropriate the experiences and the phenomena?
Never considered that. I would say yes. As human beings, we learn from others, just like any primate would, right? For instance, I've learned. And let me just diverse it. Polar bears have learned how to open up cars now.
Oh, yeah.
They've identified coolers as a food source.
Yep.
And now I know that polar bears, when I was in Labrador, they're migrating according to landfills now. Okay, so it's acquired behavior passed down through time. So who's to say that we didn't take traditions and make them our own? So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, well, it's funny because Alexander Pedikov and I had a conversation because my brother and I used to really love watching Bigfoot hunters. Or Finding Bigfoot, that's what it was. Because we were like, oh, wow, you know, the way they cut the show, they just make them look like idiots. And it's like, it's kind of funny and it's sad. But then, you know, I was talking to Alexander about it, and I was like, oh, yeah, I was talking about the episode where they were like, oh, well, you know, Bigfoot use, you know, power lines as, like, highways. And then they don't, like, elaborate on it. And so they give you this insane statement, and then, you know, the way it's presented to you, it just sounds crazy. But Alexander was like, no, that's not crazy at all. And he explained this very well thought out, like, theory. He was like, well, you know, deer use them, you know, essentially as highways because it's long, you know, tracts of land that are cleared and they can see for miles. And they don't have to worry about predators. They can just follow along. And he's like, you know, and most theories point to, you know, Bigfoot following deer trails. And I was like, oh, my God, that's brilliant. I was like, but the way it's shown, it just sounds insane. So, I mean, I get it. It's like, you know, we the world around us, as much as we adapt to it, it adapts to us in a way, right? You know, it's why you see more and more deer showing up on 295. You know, it's like they tend to adapt to us. So I would suggest that, you know, as much as we are removed from the world around us, the idea of sort of the monstrous being on the outside of civilization, right? That idea has never gone away. So places like Freetown, where it's like, yeah, we don't go there. You know, it's like the woods at the end of our street. There was sort of this unwritten rule that you don't go in there at night. And it was like that was just what we did, you know. But it's one of those things that's inherent because we understand as humans, we understand hierarchies and we understand organization, and this whole idea of chaos versus order has always been a thing. And so these places that are disordered or outside of our civilization are where all the monstrous things exist. Hence why archetypes. We experience the archetypes in these places. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that deer are to Bigfoot like seals are to sharks. When you see seals, sharks are to follow. But whatever these things are, they're huge. There's male and female and youths. Their senses, their hearing, their sight, their smell, their speed, their agility is incredible to the point of being non-human as we understand it. And as I mentioned in our prelude, we need to understand that we may not be able to understand. And They're being seen more because of cell phone cameras, okay?
Right, yeah.
And the BFRO has done remarkable work over the past 25 years to actually quadrant out where the hotspots are. So now they can go there. These are where, as I mentioned, where families have probably of these things have been for generations. They can actually go in there and experience the phenomena. Glowing eyes, balls of light, the smell, wood knock, perhaps tracks, or even a sighting.
Okay. Well, we're going to take our mid-show break here. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley, along with TuneIn.com and the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. We'll be right back with John Horrigan, so stick with us.
Hi, this is Nancy Phillips, the button chairperson for the Autumn Fest Committee. We thank everyone for their many years of supporting Autumn Fest, and to let you know that this year's buttons are now available at local small businesses. The cost is still $1 per button, and you could win a cash prize of $500, $250, or $100. If you own a local business and would like a bucket of Autumn Fest buttons, please email me at buttons@autumnfest.org, and I look forward to seeing you at this year's Autumn Fest.
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on WOON AM and FM. Our guest today is John Horrigan. We're talking about the amazing Bridgewater Triangle right in our AM/FM listening area. And we have a question, two questions actually, from Peter in Bogota, Colombia, who has become a co-host now and then with us. So, Ben, if you would be so kind. We kind of addressed the first one a little, but maybe John could extrapolate.
Indeed. When in doubt, extrapolate. So our good buddy Peter writes to us, does high strangeness, quote-unquote, exist in the Bridgewater Triangle Bigfoot cases? If so, what are examples? Which we kind of went into, but if there's any more you can point out, feel free.
Well, there's other ones, and people have claimed to have seen them, and again, there's a tremendous pathology afflicting the United States. I'm a contrarian. What they say, I contradict. So whether they've seen them, I've heard of these paranormal groups with snappy acronyms claiming to have seen all 7 phenomena at night, balls of light, thunderbirds, phantom pumas, black dogs, Bigfoots, and 2 words for that. Yeah, right. But it's usually, as you mentioned, Paul, when you're not looking specifically for it, or when you're looking down, that's when it shows up.
There's a lot to that.
And, of course, we haven't even talked about the Black Dogs of Abington, which took place, I believe, in the early part of 1971, where allegedly a black dog was seen ripping the throats out of necks of ponies. I believe it was a firefighter by the name of Philip Kane. There's some people that have disputed that story, thinking it was embellishment, exaggeration, hyperbole. Who knows? And then it concluded with people seeing this large black dog with red eyes, again, out of Victorian, the Hound of the Baskervilles, Victorian literature, and concluding with a police officer firing at point-blank range at this thing along the railroad tracks, and the dog just looking over its shoulder and then ambling off into mythology. And there's also been giant birds seen there. Where I lived in Easton, Mass, I lived an eighth of a mile. I used to go up to this place called Bird Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently a police officer by the name of Thomas Downey was going through that area. A huge bird lands in front of him. He describes it as a pteranodon or pterodactyl with a 10 to 12 foot wingspan. And then the thing flies off. Of course, he tells his fellow officers, friends, and they make fun of him. Before he passed, I had a chance to have a conversation. He wished it never happened. Nowadays, because crows are getting the size of Spitfires, right?
Yeah, they're getting pretty big.
They're scavengers. There's free food. Seagulls are huge there. So there's a litany of thunderbird sightings, and as Lauren Coleman has recounted, throughout the Midwest and the Southwest of the United States. So those 2 of the other creatures.
Interesting. So now the next question is, how many anomalous materials alleged to be paranormal Bigfoot or otherwise otherwise from the Bridgewater Triangle have been examined by a lab, and what are the results?
Good question. Some hair samples I know Chris Pittman retrieved in there, and he sent it off to a lab, and I don't want to say it's inconclusive. I don't have the answer for that. There's been evidence is scant, I will tell you that. When people emerge, In 2009, a guy came forward with a Bigfoot print. It was a perfect cast. All of the Bigfoot hunters that I know have lived their lives to get that perfect cast and have never found. This guy goes down there off of Elm Street in Bridgewater and pulls out a perfect cast. No, sorry. And I called him out for what it was, and he hoaxed it. So it's been very, very, not much hard evidence has come out of there, except for sightings like Lake Nipponicket, phantom campfires, a serpentine anomaly some boaters have seen there, and I've kayaked in Lake Nip, and I got lost in terms of I thought I was going east and I was going west. So there's you guys have spoken of vortexes before, so perhaps there are some magnetic anomalies within that area. And again, clear cut, there's high tension wires there, so who knows?
A lot of them.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, anything that sort of produces electromagnetic phenomena, right? So it's But even then, back in the day, right, you know, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, you know, you didn't have high tension wires, right?
Just audio cassettes.
Right, yeah. You had reel-to-reel tape recorders back in, 1780.
That's when I started, yeah.
So we worked in the 70s, the 1770s. But
right.
Anyway, so it's interesting that you brought up this idea of mythology, right? And we in the modern world don't really have that. Well, we do, sort of. Which would be that I would argue that the paranormal and paranormal research is the mythology of the materialist, right? That would be my argument.
Oral tradition.
Right, yeah, because it's like, people tell ghost stories, and it's like, oh, I saw the lady in white in X, Y, and Z hotel, and it's always someone who committed suicide every time. And
I take it and I embellish it. And she had glowing green eyes and a white flow and long blonde hair, even though you never said that. And then he hears it and he adds, she had a bracelet on. And
right,
she could
yeah.
fly.
But the interesting thing is, I heard this definition a little while ago, maybe on a podcast I was listening to, of what mythology sort of used to be, which I really liked because I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense than, oh, well, it's just stories. That it's a story we participate in, right? So the idea of having folklore that we participate in, right? We go to Freetown State Forest, we experience the thing there, and that's part of the story of the place that we are experiencing. There's sort of this idea now that we're all sort of the main characters in our own story, and we're not. We're all sort of, side characters participating in a greater thing. That's why you hear this thing, oh, well, they're not towing the line or the narrative or whatever. And so we're what is the narrative? What is the story that we're participating in? So in this idea of Sasquatch, the mythology of Sasquatch is so fascinating because it's this, you hear it in other things, and I think of Enkidu from the Mesopotamian mythology, right? Who, he was sort of this answer to, I think it was Gilgamesh, who was sort of this, demigod, right? Who, he just sort of, he was kind of a jerk, right? So, he sort of imposes his will on things, and I always like to point this out to people because heroes back in the day, they're not like your Disney heroes. They were awful, terrible people. But the idea was that they were heroes because they imposed their will on reality, right? Caesar was hailed as a god not because, he was a good guy, right? He was hailed as a god because he conquered the Gauls, and then he just imposed his will on everybody else. And so everyone was like, wow, this guy must be a god because look at that. And so, it's the same thing with Gilgamesh, right? So the answer to that was the Mesopotamian gods making this guy called Enkidu, who was the sort of the opposite side of the spectrum, where he wasn't this civilized thing, he was this big hairy creature, right? And the goal was to make him civilized in order to fight back against Gilgamesh. So this figure of this big hairy guy existing in the wilderness has been around forever, many different mythologies. But the fascinating thing about Sasquatch, which you don't see in a lot of other mythologies, is this sort of monstrous wild creature, but also having a side of wisdom, a side of some sort of mystery, a side of some sort of, intelligence. Usually it's just straight up, it's a monster. But there's sort of this odd aspect to Sasquatch where there's this idea of an intelligence behind it. There's an idea of some sort of, there's something else there besides, oh, well, there's this big hairy guy running around the woods. What is behind the elusiveness? Why do we want to know about it?
Great riff there. Well, they're observant and curious, right? These wild men, and they've been in American literature since the 19th century. I love stories of the abominable snowman and some of the great mountaineers, what they've seen. I go back to In Search of, that's how old I am.
Me
seeing
too.
those, right?
Yeah.
And just seeing these mountaineers, then Hillary trying to dance his way out of it that he didn't see one when we know he did. Eric Shipton photographs, and on and on and on. To me, that's fascinating. The Yeren, the Yowie in Australia, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. We were talking about before the show. They're seen in Rhode Island. I think in the northwest area, in the northeast.
There was an albino one that time. Yeah.
In the T area, as I call it, South Central Mass, northeastern Connecticut. They're absolutely seen in Rhode Island. They have been seen in Rhode Island. Just the witnesses have not come forward because they're afraid of scorn and ridicule. And that's one of the reasons why I suppressed my research for so long, because of scorn and ridicule. Now I really don't care. Well, you were talking about people embellishing or weaving themselves into the narrative. I remember leaving Roswell in 1997 after the 50th anniversary, and we just passed the 75th anniversary without a hiccup. And driving away is when they disclosed the UFOs, it's not even going to make the news because nobody will care. Lo and behold, December 2017, they disclose. They basically came out. And we basically know, the three of us know more about UFOs, the four of us, than the U.S. government. Why don't we do, because we were historians, and especially you, Paul, with all of your years of research. But people put themselves into the story. Frank Kaufman, Jim Ragsdale, and ruined the Roswell story, took all the credibility out of it. And that's what's happening now with the research of paranormal phenomena. People are saying they saw something when they didn't, especially these groups who are on a mission to see something. And as you know, Paul, it doesn't happen that way. So the red-headed hitchhiker, Route 44, Bridgewater Triangle, you guys have heard that. Brief recap for the listeners. Allegedly, people see this man in a plaid shirt, red beard, hitchhiking. They drive by. He appears in their back seat. The radio goes static. They hear a laughing in the woods. So I went down there in, I think, 2006 to see if I could. The legend says, flash your headlights 3 times and honk your horn 3 times, and it'll show up just behind the passenger side seat on the right-hand side, right at the Seekonk-Rehoboth line, right on the Rhode Island. So I did that. Boom, 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 flashed my headlights, got pulled over by the cops.
Well, you did make something happen. You
did.
You summoned the local police.
Yeah.
So, why not the adorable snowman, right? So, we have a number of questions that have arisen in our research, and other people recognize them too. For example, in the Bridgewater Triangle, which is practically within sight of Boston, biggest city in New England, where does Bigfoot come from or go? Or in Pennsylvania? We have the Clearwater, Clearfield County, the area of our Triangle research there. You have... It's rural, but it's not wilderness. You have, 15, 20, 25-acre woodlots. You have pasturage, cornfields, but no wilderness area. The theory among a lot of the people down there is that they live in old mines or, caves or something. But I mean, you're dealing with 600 or 800 pound primate here. That just doesn't wash. So the theory that we adhere to, along with Linda Godfrey and other sort of major theological figures in this field, is that there could be multiversal creatures coming and going, shapeshifters, the native, and as you said, we listen to the natives. They're the ones who've been living with us a lot longer than we have in this area anyway. And the shape-shifting means not just changing shape, but appearing and disappearing.
There's a huge chasm between the flesh and blooders, as I call them, right? The diehard Bigfoot researchers, and somebody that has the courage to say that. Again, we might not be able to understand. They may be not of this dimension. They may be equated with lights, dare I say, UFOs. I think Skinwalker Ranch, the book, I think was chapter 8, maybe, the Bigfoot one, where this man-beast anthropoid comes out of a portal. Yeah. Weird stuff. And we have to expand our minds that maybe they can present themselves as flesh and blood, but that's why we haven't found any bones, no body. Sorry, Rick Dyer, you lied twice. There's no corpse, and you're not going to get one. This Todd, what's his name? Standing, is it? Who's gone to remote areas, harsh areas of wilderness in Canada, and he's come back with some remarkable footage. And the Bigfoot community says, hoax, hoax, hoax. further explanation, further examination on my part, like the Paul Friedman footage, for instance. The Snowwalker footage I have not discarded. Patterson-Gimlin, we can all agree that's real. They tried to put 4 guys in an ape costume. Sorry. And I sat with Bob Gimlin for 4 hours, and he said, I wish it was a guy in an ape costume, because whoever did it, he did a hell of a job, but I know what I saw. I saw it looked like an ape.
Yeah.
So.
Well, then there's the issue of the smells. Okay, much has been made of the idea that Bigfoot smells terrible, and the sulfur or whatever smell people are talking. Now, in my experience, I didn't have any smell of that kind. My theory is, and I'd like to see what you think of this, John, is that, and I say this because I don't mean to make everybody laugh here, but I'm very friendly with the local skunks here in our hill in Woonsocket. I think they are lovely animals. Once they know you, that they don't get alarmed. So anyway, I think Bigfoot perhaps that may be a defense mechanism, the smell, because I've never smelled it, because I always go in with respect, and they don't feel threatened if that's, I think I've had 2 experiences, once in New Mexico in '67 and once in Pennsylvania in 2016. So what say you on that whole issue of the smell?
That makes sense to me. What you just said is that it's a fear mechanism, danger, when people smell the sulfurs. And let's talk about their hygiene. I'm sure that they don't have underarm deodorant, they don't take showers or shampoo, but in the same token, I'm sure that there are bodies of water where they can wash themselves off. Yeah. But yeah, there are a lot of cases, more cases than not, where there's no scent. And as you said, skunks are misunderstood.
They are
creatures for sure.
Yeah.
But perhaps that is some sort of defensive mechanism, or to let a member of its clan or tribe know where it's been. Don't know. Hard to say.
I mean, most creatures I'm aware are very clean. Pigs are very clean. They just get a bum rap. So anyway, but that's the idea on the smell thing. Now, before we burn up the hour here, tell us where people can find out more about you, John.
I guess they could Google me. You could find my TV show, The Folklorist, on YouTube that I host. And I was very lucky to be surrounded by so many talented people. We have some paranormal things. The Ape Canyon incident, which took place in 1924.
Oh, yeah.
We did a recreation of that. Dover Demon, Castle Island, The Woman and Lady in Black, that story. And there's a bunch of paranormal stories that we've done. So I suggest go to YouTube. No need to write to me with any cases. I'm not going to go out and research it.
Yeah.
But you can find me, Google me, and you'll find all my weird personalities.
Now, the Ape Canyon thing is very interesting. And that's not the Bridgewater Triangle, but is that the one where a bunch of loggers were shelled, if you will, by Bigfoot? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. In 1924, some miners, there was going out there in the remote areas near the foot of St. Helens, and I guess that cabin was demolished after the eruption of 1980. But I guess they see this entity, right, minding its own business, again, curious, looking at them, and they fire at it, and it just annoys this entire tribe or whatever, this group of man-beast anthropoids. And so by the time that the lights go down, I think it's the second day, they're in this metal shack. They start pelting them with stones, these bipedal creatures. Boom, boom, boom. A night of terror throughout the whole night. And the man who it's not Albert Austin, I should know this. Anyways, he's there recounting the story firsthand, and they're under bombardment until the sun comes up. And after that, they skedaddle. They leave their equipment there and just bolt and leave the area. And it's one of the few stories of aggressive action by alleged Sasquatches.
Okay.
And it's a classic.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you've investigated, too, are lake monsters. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. 1997, I went over to Loch Ness, and I met up with Robert Rines and Charles Wyckoff. Charles Wyckoff lived in Needham, where I was living at the time, with the Loch Ness expedition. Their theory was the summer solstice is where these creatures mate and they come out. And I agreed with that. So I managed to talk myself onto one trip and go out through the loch with them, but it was fascinating looking at their equipment. They did get some returns. I drove around the loch. I nearly drove into the loch, because you're looking over like,
Yep.
But I believe in the Loch Ness Monster. The Loch Ness surgeon's photograph, it's been dismissed. I talked the Alistair Boyd, who brought that and said it was a hoax, and I can agree with that. But there are countless sightings of that for over 100 years. So I believe there's some sort of serpentine anomaly, or the spirit of some serpentine anomaly exists in that and major lakes around the world.
One of the things you mentioned, of course, it was myth and folklore, whether it be the First Nations or whoever. But we are big on that as the vessel of the memory of the human race. Something happened in folk, and you're a folklorist as well.
The footprint, right. And studying history, the appropriation of North America, the Pilgrims came here for one reason. They found Town Brook, fresh water. Boston was settled for one reason and one reason only. There was Reverend Blackstone. That he had a great spring. You can go at Spring Street in Boston, fresh water.
Old friend of ours.
Yep. Yeah. It was a random sighting. And then from there, it's, we'll pay for it later. And they lied and swindled and brought our diseases from Europe. We remember humans had lived with animals for thousands of years, and we built up immunities. So by the time they came here, pristine lands with Native Americans who did not have the antibodies, they died off quickly. And in fact, the Wampanoags, led by Massasoit, the Narragansetts were their rivals. And Massasoit saw, hey, if I unite with these white people with these fire sticks, right? They'll give me some strength and some leverage against the Narragansetts. And then when the Narragansetts saw all the Wampanoags dying off in what was known as the Great Dying from 1616 through 1619, they social distanced. They went into the interior and saved themselves. So it's we wiped out, and then we moved west. We haven't even talked about the scourge of the West, what the settlers did. Whoa. My God, the blood that was shed there. And I'm glad Custer bought it, okay? I'm not a Custer guy at all, and he got what he deserved. And now it's ironic that these Native Americans finally they're getting their lands handed back to them after 350 years. So
this is totally off subject, but how come the natives didn't give the Europeans diseases? How come it didn't work both ways?
Well, they didn't even have our plants here. We brought wheat, barley, oats, right? They only had corn. The only domesticated animal they had was the llama. They didn't even have the wheel. And I guess that the only disease they did give, there you go, gonorrhea. Okay, that.
Oh, no kidding.
That came from America. They brought that back to Europe.
But nothing airborne. I just
no, they were very healthy.
I just asked weird questions.
No, it's a good question. I don't even know if they had influenza here.
Probably not.
Because they dressed scantily and they made use. They went where the climate changed, but they were really a fit race. And again, they didn't have the immunities to ward off European diseases.
Well, at that point, we'd also had in Europe there were tons of plagues that came from all over the place.
Oh, that's
Africa,
true.
Asia, all sorts of things that just kind of
crossroads.
mixed and meshed and all these other things. So of course, all sorts of diseases would pop up that wouldn't exist, in between, in the continents across the oceans,
But the Europeans had been here. There were fishing camps in Maine, trading posts and stuff, long before the Pilgrims.
Correct, and it's just what you said there, Ben. We're going through that today with coronavirus. But right. Paul, my theory is, and I've talked with people at Plymouth Patuxent, they said Ground Zero, Patient Zero was a French trapper in Maine, and then the scourge, the Great Dying, went south. I think no, because the devastation at Plymouth that. One of John Smith's, the guy's name was Hunt, I believe. One of his men also had it, so there was a second Ground Zero for the Great Dying, in my opinion, that took place at Patuxent, which is why it wiped out those villages and why the Narragansetts skedaddled into the interior.
Of course, our question today would be, was Bigfoot affected? But anyway, what is the next step for you in your research?
Well, I like to keep my ear to the ground, and I love the classic UFO cases from the early parts of the year. I've walked away from Roswell. Either there's no flying saucer crashes or there's a litany. There was an incident at Roswell. They found debris, and you've interviewed Jesse Marshall Jr., but in terms of an auxiliary crash site, I've walked away from that. I don't believe, as Kevin Randall has said, where are the alien bodies? Okay? I believe the government doesn't know much about UFOs. That more people listening to this radio station knows more about UFOs than the government does. So I'm going to continue to look to the skies. As I told you earlier, I'm moving into eschatology and miracles and divine intervention right now. That's where I am in my life, and I find that fascinating, and miracles and whatnot, because I think right now we're at a pivot point for the human race.
Interesting. I don't know if anybody's aware of this. Certainly our audience is, any old-timers. Joe Ferrier, who was a very,
Met Joe back in the day in the 90s, yep.
No kidding.
Yep.
He had the afternoon show here on WON for over 50 years.
Joe's Moldy Oldies, his record store across town.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he had he was a UFO figure of the 1960s, publisher of Probe magazine, which I have an original copy that he gave me, and just a wonderful, wonderful guy. He came on this show once, because we were writing back of him in the drive time on Mondays for years, and he mentioned a lot of things that he had never mentioned publicly before about his own experiences. Fascinating thing. But when you mentioned that whole scenario, just all we thought it was Joe. Dear friend.
I got to talk to him once upon a time.
No kidding.
Yes.
Were you on his show?
No, I interviewed him and
Okay.
chatted with him at a UFO convention. I used to hold a UFO convention called the Mass UFO Show once upon a time, and the Mass Monster Mash back in the early part of the century after Joe had passed. But I crossed with him, I think in '93 at a convention in Connecticut or something like that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to send you the link to that show. I'll put it on Facebook too, because it was really fascinating, some of the stuff. So then we're coming down to our announcements at this point.
Yes, sir.
And let's proceed.
Indeed. And finally, after many years, the Exeter UFO Festival returns in September at the historic Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall over the Labor Day weekend. That's September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event, and the whole downtown gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities. Along with ourselves, there are a litany of speakers, including Valerie LaFaso, the Ralph Blumenthal, Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, Mac Maloney, and many, many others. And so we've got something going on ourselves as well. We'll be speaking there, and the subject of our talk is time storms, with many thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randalls, who coined the term. We plan to do our traditional live broadcast from there. That's why I have no hair. And the event is on Sundays with a panel of the speakers. This is a very fun event, so you can join us if you'd like. You can visit ExeterUFOFestival.org for many details.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be a great event, and it's only 2 weeks away. So visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WOON AM and FM, including many that have been restored in the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com. Also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We also have a show app. Doesn't do a lot, but it doesn't cost anything either. BehindTheParanormal.com, there's a link. You can browse our books there on the website as well, along with those of our other guest co-hosts at our show website, again, BehindTheParanormal.com. You can also find more about the show, our many cases over the years, our public appearances, and how to book us.
And you can also visit our website for all the charities that we've adopted over the years on our charity page. There's links to several good causes that we've adopted, including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts. If that's not enough H's for you, I'm sorry. USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, helping Haiti's orphans. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently, the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund.
And I should point out that we are very, very careful about the charities we adopt on the show. We know the people who run them personally, and the money goes where you want it to. Especially, my favorite is helping Haiti's orphans. A lot of the children in the orphanages were originally, at least, were orphaned during the earthquake in 2010, and since then they have grown and are doing some wonderful work. So, what's on the menu for next week, then?
Well, next week, that's August 28th. Geez, we're just powering through August. We'll continue our cryptid theme with the globe-trotting British monster hunter Richard Freeman. You can send your questions and comments to Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com.
And I should point out that next week I'm going to be away with Ben's mom. We're headed south, and Ben will be flying solo here.
You'll be flying and I'll be flying. It'll be great.
Yeah, we'll be doing a great job. I'll listen in if I can. And if I want to bother you, maybe I'll call in. I don't know.
Hey, feel free to bother away, but I can imagine you'll have your hands full. But hey, it'll be fun. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
Richard and I will talk shop, we'll talk cryptids, and we'll do all the fun stuff. And maybe I will ask some fun questions. Who knows?
Who knows?
Maybe they'll be terrible questions.
No, they won't. Coming from you, they'll be wonderful questions. Anyway, so what do we have coming up on the in the refrigerator for next week, Ben?
Oh, I just told you.
Of course, I'm okay. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's really old.
It's still, you know, it's.
I'm looking
it's
at
one
the
of
script here.
Well, you know, we're a little fried. It's very warm here in the
Right.
New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley here in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, with a nice 87 degrees out there, and we're a little warm, so it's understandable.
So pay no attention to me.
Yes.
We leave you today with a thought-provoking thought from none other than Thomas Edison, whom I really like. He stole everything from Tesla.
Yeah,
anyway,
he did, but hey, you know, he had the forethought to steal from him. So.
So anyway, quote, "Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up," unquote. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.